Current Affairs.
This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on GST Bachat Utsav festive boost across sectors. The participants are Dilip Chenoy and Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst. Moderator is Vaibhav J. Srivastav, anchor.
The GST reforms have been hailed as one of the biggest in the country in terms of giving a direct benefit to the end customers as well as giving a major boost to industry. Keep international uncertainties aside, the people of the country have reciprocated with complete faith in the government and their policies and have exceeded the economic spending expectations of all analysts across sectors. The immaculate timing of these reforms, their impact on various sectors of industry, exports and long-term benefits are now being analyzed in detail. To discuss on the GST Bachat Utsav festive boost across sectors and to explain its positive impact on the Indian economy, we have with us two very special guests in the studios of Akashvani. We are joined in by economic analysts Shri Dilip Chenoy and Shri Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee. Dilip sir, welcome to the studios of Akashvani.
Thanks, Vaibhav.
Shubhamoy sir, welcome to the studios of Akashvani.
Pleased to be here.
Dilip sir, Prime Minister Narendra Modi during the recently held Rozgar Mela has stressed on the impact of GST reforms during the festival season. He said that this is a reform that has greatly impacted the Indian economy and the lives of the people. Let's hear the words of Prime Minister Modi and then discuss in further detail.
धनतेरस दीपावली पर जिस तरह रिकॉर्ड बिक्री हुई है, नए नए रिकॉर्ड बने, पुराने रिकॉर्ड टूटे, ये दिखाता है कि कैसे जीएसटी में हुए रिफॉर्म ने देश की अर्थव्यवस्था को नई गति दी है। एमएसएमई सेक्टर और रिटेल ट्रेड में भी हमें इस रिफॉर्म का सकारात्मक असर देखने को मिल रहा है। इस वजह से मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, लॉजिस्टिक्स, पैकेजिंग और डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन जैसे क्षेत्रों में अनेक रोजगार के नए अवसर बन रहे हैं।
Dilip sir, the Prime Minister stressed upon how the GST Bachat Utsav, the reforms in the GST have made more employment opportunities in various sectors. Whenever we talk about MSMEs, whenever we talk about retail trade, logistics, packaging, the first thing that gets into our minds is not just great revenue being generated, but also great employment opportunities being generated. What will you say about what the PM just said?
So the Prime Minister's comment about new records being created is actually true. So if you look at the retail traders body, they've said that this year sales grew about 25%. They talked about 6.05 lakh crores worth of sales in this festive season. So three things happen. The first is because you have such high sales, you require service people, you require sales people to actually meet the demand of the big rush of buyers. So that's an immediate increase in employment. The second thing that actually happens is that the packaging and logistics industry also increase and again a short-term immediate impact on the economy. And the third is that in the manufacturing sector, when these products were manufactured just before the Diwali and festive period, I think the manufacturers anticipated certain percentage of sales. In all estimates, and even if you look at the automotive industry, for example, the sales far outweighed what they anticipated. And therefore, in some cases, in some industry sectors, their capacity utilization is coming to around 75 or 80%. And this is a time when then people will start investing for the future and then creating more employment. So three specific impacts: increase short-term employment, increase in sectors of logistics and packaging, and for a kind of an investment plans being accelerated to meet demands of the future in the manufacturing sector.
And on a larger sector, just giving a positive impact on the whole of the Indian economy, the taxation that is being put, more taxes being collected, and giving a sense of security to not just the investors but all stakeholders across sectors that the Indian economy's fundamentals are strong and they're getting stronger. sir?
Yeah, I think this was a point which actually Minister Vaishnav also made earlier, and the Finance Minister and the Commerce and Industry Minister made, that, the GST reforms and the income tax reforms have actually added certain points to the GDP growth and kind of helped in negating some of the negative impact of the tariffs that were put on the economy and the slowing down of exports, especially to the US and other markets. So this is also shows that the domestic market is resilient, there's consumption, and consumption is growing, and this again acts as a incentive or as a clear indicator to foreign investors who are looking at investing in India that India is on a growth path and it is actually meeting the headwinds due to other geopolitical issues squarely, and further reforms are only going to happen here and is going to remain an attractive destination for not only foreign direct investment but also for domestic manufacturers.
So it will be a great destination for investments for not just the domestic but also for international investors, and the fundamentals being strong, the path ahead looks great. Shubhamoy sir, what are your views on what Prime Minister Modi just said, and how do you see these GST reforms impacting the Indian economy?
Well, the first thing is everyone loves a winner. And the interesting thing about the GST reform is that this came at a time when clearly there was a lot of discussion or rather concern that the pace of reforms, substantive reforms in the Indian economy had loosened. So this one actually corrects a very important position there. It shows that the Indian state, and that includes both the center and the states, have the stomach for taking on hard reforms. As Dilip was rightly pointing out, this has got several beneficial effects. But the big point about this GST change was that both the center and the state bargained and agreed that we will get cut, or what we will lose by lowering the rates, we will more than make up by the increased consumption that will happen across all sectors. But that's a very substantial faith in the Indian economy, in the patterns of consumption behavior, and the growth rate of the economy. So together, all of these things do show that there is, given our choices, the Indian political system is able to make the right choice, the right alternatives, and looking at the future. And that, I think, set the stage for some very good measures going ahead too, which will stand the Indian economy in good stead. This is because right now what we are seeing is that the global economy, the global environment is getting to be extremely difficult. The consumption drivers, the investment drivers are all becoming local. In that sort of situation, having the right set of incentives to encourage manufacture of both goods and services within the economy, to encourage people to go out and buy those items, and thus therefore set up a very, whatever we should call, a beneficial cycle of growth, is something that the Indian economy did need, and it has been provided. And as most of us would say, it is this quarter. We have not yet seen the full impact of these benefits, but we shall now be seeing the impact of these throughout the long festival season and going ahead into the last quarter. I suspect we are in for some positive surprises.
Absolutely. Let's hear the words of Prime Minister Modi, where he hailed the GST reforms and said how these reforms have brought more joys to the industry as well as to consumers.
इस बार त्योहारों के इस मौसम में जीएसटी बचत उत्सव ने भी नए रंग भर दिए हैं। आप सब जानते हैं, देश में जीएसटी दरों में कटौती का कितना बड़ा रिफॉर्म हुआ है। इसका असर केवल लोगों की बचत तक ही सीमित नहीं है। नेक्स्ट जनरेशन जीएसटी रिफॉर्म से रोजगार के अवसरों का भी विस्तार मिल रहा है। जब हर रोज इस्तेमाल होने वाले सामान सस्ते होते हैं तो मांग भी बढ़ती है। जब मांग बढ़ती है तो उत्पादन और सप्लाई चेन को भी गति मिलती है, और जब फैक्ट्रियां ज्यादा उत्पादन करती हैं तो नई नौकरियां पैदा होती हैं। इसलिए ये जीएसटी बचत उत्सव रोजगार उत्सव में भी बदल रहा है।
Mr. Chinoy, The timing of these GST reforms have been talked in detail. How important was the fact that the GST reforms were brought just before the festive, the marriage season, the season wherein a lot of spending of domestic households is seen, and people wait for this season because they have to buy a lot of stuff, not just for their daily usage, but also things like two-wheelers, things like cars or heavy machineries for which they wait for the entire year. Your view, sir?
So I think the timing of the GST reforms was very relevant, not only in the nature of the festive season, but also what was happening and what the perception was that what would happen to the Indian economy because of geopolitical reasons. And like I mentioned earlier, the tariffs that were put here. So the timing was very important. Second, to really get the benefits of this and pass the benefits on to the common man and to the average household, it was important to time it at the festive season, because if you look at the whole year and in a house or domestic budget, or when you buy specific consumer durables here, this is the period where a large number of families invest. And therefore, the impact of the GST cut was very significant for these large number of families that invested. For example, if you take the two-wheeler segment, compared to last year in this Navratri period, we saw a 36% increase. Now, for those people constituting the 30%, it was a big saving.
Absolutely.
Not only that, if you take the passenger vehicles, passenger vehicles sales also grew 34.8%. So there was a large number of people across the country that benefited from this. Similarly, in the white goods and TVs, because there also you had a significant reduction in prices. So the timing was good. It was beneficial for the economy. As Shubhamoy said, you're going to see some surprises in the GDP numbers possibly this quarter and also next quarter. And of course, as the Prime Minister said, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a virtuous cycle that we are creating. And with greater sales, greater demand, capacity utilization going up, investment and employment going forward, it's a very positive kind of a circle that this whole reform, not only the GST reform, we're forgetting the income tax reform that was also done earlier.
So virtuous cycle being created wherein we see more production, more consumption, we see more stakeholders getting the benefit. Shubhamoy, sir, your views on the timings of the GST reforms right before the season, which the whole country practically waits to spend a lot of their money, and how it has impacted the industry as well as the economy.
The timing, of course, was extremely fortuitous. There's no doubt about it. But I'd also ask you to look at what Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said, that the process wasn't accidental. It was happening over quite some time. As she pointed out in her press conference, there has been, the GST committees were meeting for about 1.5 years, and several ones were set up, including those on insurance, including those on rationalization, to look at what are the changes that could be brought through. So those reports were debated, formulated, presented before the GST Council, which means the central government and all the state finance ministers. And only after the decision was taken to make those changes adopted by the last meeting of the GST Council, which we are talking about. So it has been a long chain. It's taken about 1.5 years. And that is what I was basically saying, that, these reforms don't happen suddenly. They take time. There's a lot of homework that has to be done by the concerned agencies, in this case, finance ministries of different states and the central government, and only then sort of bring in a positive surprise for the people. That it, of course, has happened just before the festival season makes it enormously significant. But at any stage, I would have said that this was something that was change whose time had come. So definitely, certainly. Yes.
So absolutely, the government was planning and analyzing the various factors, both internal and external, and hence the finance minister said that it's not just accidental, it's process which has taken a long period of time. And after that period, after those chain of thoughts, now we have these GST reforms. At a recent press conference, Nirmala Sitharamanji, the union's finance minister, mentioned about the impact of GST reforms during the festival season and how it affected the sales of two-wheelers and tractors. Let's hear her words and then continue with this discussion.
Two-wheeler sales increased 21.60 lakh units. Hero Motors apparently saw the highest ever monthly sales. And so is the passenger vehicle dispatch, which is 3.72 lakhs in September alone. Mind you, we are talking about only between September 22nd and 30th of September, although some of them had started giving it earlier onwards, but 3.72 lakh units have been dispatched in September. And overall, therefore, just in those 9 days, there's been a flurry of buying and selling, so every sector has come out. Similarly, tractors. After the cuts to 1.46 lakh units have been dispatched in September 2025. Month on month, it's about 64,332 units. Sales more than doubled in September for tractors.
Mr. Chenoy, from stalls and small shopkeepers selling daily and household items to industries selling equipment, machinery and vehicles, everyone saw the impact of these GST reforms. They saw an increased turnover. What do you have to say about this?
So I think the finance minister's figures talked about September increases. The October increases are slightly higher than that in terms of numbers, and I gave you the rough idea of the percentages. One indicator of the optimism in industry is actually commercial vehicle sales. And during this period, according to FADA and according to the Vahan data, commercial vehicle sales grew about 14.6%. So that means that the whole logistics sector and the people invest in for the long term have a very positive optimism about the growth of the Indian economy. It's actually a leading indicator. Commercial vehicles are a leading indicator. If it's growing, that means that the economy is going to grow, and if they're declining, that there seems to be some challenge in the economy. In this case, it's actually grown significantly. Even three-wheeler sales, which is both cargo and passenger, both have grown. The services sector and the hotel and other sectors also have seen increased kind of revenue during this period, not only because people were eating out, but people also were actually traveling. And therefore, it's a whole positive for the economy, and only goes to show that the consumer confidence and the citizens' confidence, as well as the business confidence in the continued growth of consumption, at least till March 26, is definitely there, and possibly for the next year going forward. But the challenge next year was that you'll be on a very high base, so growth rates would be, percentage may not be there, but we need to see some good high growth rates also.
So because of optimism, we are seeing a lot of spending from people. We are seeing spending from those who are in the industry, who are banking on Indian economy to grow. Shubhamoy sir, your views on what Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji just said.
One of the things that we often do not touch upon is the procedural simplicity. So there's a lot of issues that come in especially for small and medium enterprises, when there are too many rates, and those rates create their own set of problems. Because what happens is, we talk about corruption issues, we talk about the fact that industry, especially the small and medium enterprises, have to regularly battle rates and paperwork in their business. That has got substantially reduced, solved. It's just one rate, 5%. Services, 18%. This is something which I expect will have a tremendous impact on lots of enterprises, because they don't have to wrestle with this sort of a thing. In fact, the GST template gives us an extremely good model to use for something like customs, where we can, simplify systems drastically and create India as a very important powerhouse for manufacturing. It is being done now, and I think this is something that can really, when we shall now see the uptake, not in just terms of sales of final goods, but in the ease of doing business, which is often not adequately appreciated, but is a very significant follow-through of reduced rates. So in this case, we just have 2 rates, and therefore a huge simplification of paperwork. I think that is something whose impact we've yet to see. And I'm sure going ahead, those will have a major pleasant surprise for the expansion of medium enterprises, small enterprises across India.
So procedural simplifications have definitely added on to the ease of doing sentiment in India and the Indian economy amongst the industry and other stakeholders. Which another thing, Mr. Chenoy, that I would love to ask you, and its impact, is Make in India. How important is it that we are self-reliant? How important is it that we lower our burden of import spending and we produce more and more stuff in the country. And as the Prime Minister has time and again said, make in India, make for the world. We've seen the great joyous festive season just go by and still moving on. And the impact that we've seen of Make in India, the products that were locally sourced, locally produced, locally conceptualized, being consumed in India and abroad. How do you see this?
So there are two things happening here.
Ji.
The first is, in all of this GST, Bachat Utsav, and, there has been a very interesting sub-line to all the statements that the Prime Minister has been making and the other leaders have been making. There's about Swadeshi, buy local.
Ji.
Vocal for local was the earlier guidance that the Prime Minister gave. And in his earlier speeches on Independence Day speeches, he talked about the need for MSME to identify one product that is imported, to look at manufacturing that in India at a cost lower than the import so that they can, be it with zero effect and zero defect. So it's been a consistent kind of clarion call for 3 or 4 things from December of 2014. First was Make in India. That's when Make in India was actually launched. The second was local for vocal. Third was one district, one product. The fourth was zero effect and zero defect. And more recently has been the PLI schemes, where 14 sectors you've looked at production and incentives for a majority of the things where we were severely import dependent, whether advanced cell chemistries, electric vehicles, pharmaceuticals, APIs, drones. There are 14 different sectors, and the most successful sector here, which also actually saw record sales during this time, was the mobile phone sector. And looking at how the PLI scheme has actually placed India as a major exporter of mobile phones from a net importer of mobile phones. And obviously that's creating jobs, that's creating employment. And if you look at the MSME sector and you take a Shubham Boy's point about ease of doing business, the government is not stopping just at GST and income tax and tax reforms for the MSME sector. You just had the Gauba committee report come out, which looked specifically at the ease of doing business and the pain points of medium and small industries. They've come out with 38 plus recommendations. And you're going to see this actually accelerate in going forward. And each sector by sector, you're going to see investments coming in because of PLI. There have few lakh crores of investment coming in. You're seeing new products and services going to be made in India and for the world, like the example of mobile phones that I gave you. Similarly, in white goods, and in other sectors, you're going to see huge continued investment. We are only not even halfway. In some cases, we are just about halfway through. In other cases, we are about a year and a half through the 5-year cycle. So that's also going to set an investment cycle, a manufacturing cycle, and hopefully those products will be exported going forward in an employment cycle.
True that. Shubham, your views on Make in India and how it has truly impacted not just the GST reforms and the IT reforms that have been brought forward by the government, but also the fact that Make in India, when we make here, when we produce here, we lower our costs, we give more people employment opportunities, and we give our economy an opportunity to export and gain that revenue as well. Your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, basically to continue from where Dilip left, the point that comes along very strongly is that in India, doing business has to be made simpler. And to make that simpler, procedural reforms, which I just talked about earlier, and is a very important part. When we say Make in India, we essentially mean the medium enterprises, the small enterprises. The big enterprises can take care of themselves. But to create employment in huge number of areas, we need to ensure that there are startups get the time to do what they are meant to do rather than follow paperwork. Quite a few things are happening along with the GST. For instance, the government has simplified the EPF rules. There are lots of other rules like the labor code, which is being simplified. But these often are not in the public gaze, but they do a tremendous amount of service to enterprises to get on with their job of what they want to do. And these have actually got a fillip from the GST reform. Because GST reform has made it clear that making it simpler is actually a win-win situation. And that is a very major takeaway from this season. You talked about the fact that it's festive, there's a joyous feel around. Well, I think the festivity actually gets a big boost if we understand through the bureaucracy that there's a need to clean up our laws and rules, which is actually being done in a very big way. And that's the political leadership is firmly behind it. And these will actually most salience to push the theme of India as the center of manufacturing, Atmanirbhar, going vocal for local. All of those thoughts will actually become very coherent in this scheme of things.
Union Minister Piyush Goyal has hailed the GST reforms as the biggest reforms in independent India. Let's hear his words.
India has clarity in its vision, and India continues to purchase goods and enjoy the fruits of services. Even after the announcement on 15th August, the growth trend continued in the rest of the August month. In August, the outward FDI was about $4 billion. As soon as the GST announcement came in, people quickly, investors are sharp, they can see the future. They quickly realize that this is a bonanza, and Indian business, Indian industry is surely going to see a massive upswing. And therefore, in the month of September, the outward FDI fell straight away from 4 billion to less than 900 million.
Mr. Chinoy, your views on the same when we are talking about international uncertainties and upheavals. India, with its strong fundamentals, shows an investment avenue which is not just growing at a good pace, but also shows great promise in the future.
Yeah, so if you understand what Commerce Minister was communicating, he just took two data points of August and September and showed how India's outward investment actually went from 4 billion to a few hundred million. And reflecting possibly a shift of investment or resource allocation to India. But what also has happened at the same time, if you look at the foreign portfolio investments and the foreign investments there, which were showing negative earlier, now are positive, and the reinvestment in Indian market has also, restarted. So the cabinet had approved 6 proposals, and we had the inaugural of one such unit in Assam very recently. 4 more are under approval there. So even like in a sector as investment heavy and capital heavy and very modern as semiconductors, you are seeing at least 10 proposals, and 6 of which have been approved, 2 of which have already had a groundbreaking, and 4 more new proposals coming in. So all of this combined just reflects that India is possibly the place to be, and Indian manufacturing and the domestic market is a growth area, both for domestic industry and also for foreign investors as well.
So faith in the government and optimism in the Indian economy's track record and future fuels investment, which further fuels opportunities. Shubhamoy sir, your views on the same?
We are now getting into very serious reform issues. The GST was one of those very significant reforms. In fact, I would say in the past few years, in fact, taking on from what the Commerce and Industry Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, said, it's probably one of the most significant reforms that was done. Because this was where GST was supposed to ultimately stand. 2 rates, and that's it. No further changes. Now C is a significant changes in taxation. As you can see this year itself, you mentioned that earlier, that there's been a substantial leg up in income tax change reform. The minimum threshold has been raised up to rupees 12 lakhs. What now remains to be changed is our customs. It is not about high rates or low rates. It's about simplification of customs procedure, which is very important because we are talking about pushing our exports in a very significant way. If we want to do that, we will definitely have to ensure that our border taxes becomes clear. One of an important thing that has already been done by the government, and that's something that is often not known in public, is quality control order. So from 2019 onwards, from just about 75 odd, there have now been issued about 800 quality control orders. Now, why is this? Because it's the same thing that, again, you mentioned in earlier about producing in India with 0 defect. So Indian product should conform to global standards when it's going outside. And the quality checks must happen in India at a level which gives foreign consumers the confidence that an Indian product is by definition quality. All of these changes don't often appear in public as, reforms of the first generation types. But these are actually those which create a very significant footprint for business to succeed.
We truly hope that the reforms bear fruit and Indian economy goes from strength to strength. A big thank you to both our special guests, Shri Dilip Chenoy and Shri Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee. Sir, thank you so much for being here with us in the studios of Akashvani.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on GST Bachat Utsav festive boost across sectors. The participants were Dilip Chenoy and Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst. Moderator was Vaibhav J. Srivastav, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsttalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.
Current Affairs.